Hello and welcome to India's World. India first cancelled the visa of Dolkun Issa, a Germany-based Uyghur leader from China's restive Xinjiang province. This was followed by denying visa to two other Chinese dissidents, New York-based Tiananmen Square protester Lu Jinghua and Hong Kong-based activist Ray Wong, who co-founded an organization called Hong Kong Indigenous. Their visas were cancelled at the last moment on technical grounds. All three were to attend an interfaith conference at Dharamshala, where the Tibetan spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, also resides. Some reports in the media suggested that India granted a visa to the Chinese dissidents after China blocked India's bid to get Masood Azhar, the chief of Jaish-e-Mohammed, on the UN list of terrorists. Why did India first agree to facilitate a conference of Chinese pro-democracy activists in Dharamshala and then cancel the visas of some of the participants? Had India not anticipated that China would be provoked by this? If India indeed wanted to send a strong message to China, then why did it buckle under pressure from Beijing and cancel the visas? Was the Indian action just bureaucratic bungling or the result of ill-thought-out and inconsistent decision-making? These are the questions we are asking today. To understand the logic of the government's actions, we have with us three distinguished experts. We have with us Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, a distinguished diplomat. He's been India's Foreign Secretary and Ambassador of India to Russia, France, Turkey and Egypt. We have with us Professor Alka Acharya. She is Director of Institute of Chinese Studies and also Professor at the Center for East Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. And we have with us Mr. Mohan Guruswamy, a strategic affairs expert. He heads the Center for Policy Alternatives, an independent think tank, and was earlier associated with the Observer Research Foundation as this distinguished fellow. Now he says he's into retirement, but I welcome all of you to this discussion. Professor Sibal, let me start with you. Has the government done the right thing by reviewing its decision to give visas to Uyghur dissident leader Dolkun Issa and two other Chinese dissidents?
Well, I think if government were to have looked forward a little bit and were able to visualize a situation where the Chinese would protest and they may be obliged to review their decision, then the best thing would have been not to issue the visas in the first place. The decision taken obviously was a considered decision and a conscious decision. And at the moment of taking it may well have been that the government felt that it was high time that we sent some signals to China in the wake of their constant slapping on our face that they do by refusing to allow the listing of well-known Pakistan-based terrorists involved in terrorism in India to be included on that sanctions list. I think at the end of the day, whatever we've done was not considered in its entirety and thought through, which is why we are confronted with this situation where we have invited actually all this criticism unnecessarily by seemingly revoking the visas under Chinese pressure, whether they were Chinese pressure or we decided ourselves that there might be Chinese pressure and took in advance a decision to revoke visas. I don't know. It's very murky and unclear.
Okay. Professor Acharya, now this speculation about tit for tat for Masood Azhar. My question to you is, how would India have got any satisfaction if Masood Azhar was put on the UN sanctions list? You already have Hafiz Saeed on the UN sanctions list. There's an American bounty on his head. He moves around freely. So how does getting him onto the list give you any satisfaction at all?
I think that's something for the government really to take stock of because clearly a lot of prestige and a lot of concern about security has been put on stake in this process. One can argue that what the Chinese did was nothing new. One can even say with great degree of certainty that this is what they would have done, and therefore it was anticipated, should have been anticipated. So I think somewhere the need to put him on the sanctions list may or may not enlarge the options of the Indian government in dealing with this problem of terror. But the question is that what exactly was the signal that was sought to be sent to the Chinese? You know, this is something that one keeps hearing over and over again, that by putting, so one is this question that you said, that what would we have gained? On the other hand, we knew they would block it, and therefore we decided to send them a signal. what is the signal precisely? That we'll do what you are doing, or that we can also give measure for measure, or what? So I think the whole thing is somewhat not clearly conceptualized. The whole thing, by whole thing I mean that how do we actually bring this issue of our concerns about terror with the Chinese? Because what is now here clearly a gap is that we are not on the same page as China as far as terror is concerned. So what is this dialogue all about?
So Mohan, could it be that India, the signal India sent was that, look, if you don't take a clear-cut stand on terrorism, this is what we are capable of doing. And then the visit of the Indian National Security Advisor takes place to Beijing. Could there be a backroom deal that, look, we will revoke these visas, but in future desist from doing this?
Well, that's nice to think of that, but I don't think so. Because this interfaith, inter-ethnic conference was organized much before. And it's run by an organization called Initiatives for China, which is an organization of Chinese dissidents, which is American-based, and funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, which is funded by the US Congress. So this conference was on schedule, and this is fifth of the series. It takes place all over the world, and the same lot of Chinese dissidents and emigrants come there. So this is an afterthought, saying this is a tit for tat. You're having that conference in Dharamsala, and you need Government of India permission for that, Ministry of Home Affairs clearance for that. So they obviously got it, and that's how the conference is being held. So don't link these two things together. And as far as denial of visa is concerned, you denied the visa to Dolkun Issa, saying that he's on the Interpol notice. Then you denied the other two, to the Hong Kong guy and to Lu, saying that, you didn't give them a reason, saying that, you basically said you're on a tourist visa, but you're attending a conference, so we can't. And there's another Uyghur from Washington, from the Uyghur National Congress, who was denied a visa, who was given a visa, and it was withdrawn. A man called Omar Kanat, who looks after their office in Washington. He was to come, and he was also denied the visa. Now, this is all suggestive of total incompetence. One hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing. Okay. The Ministry of Home Affairs gave the permissions. My friends in the External Affairs Ministry, who I've spoken to, say that, we didn't know about this. It's not our thing. It was done by the security people who sit in the PMO.
All right. We're going to discuss this confusion further, but we need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing India's flip-flop on giving visas to Chinese dissidents. Mr. Sibal, you've been Foreign Secretary of India. Who and at what level could have superseded the decision of the Home and the Foreign Ministries to grant visas to these dissidents? Because any international conference, you have to take permission of MEA as well as Home Ministry. You have to say who are the participants. So clearly somebody superseded the decision because visas were granted. Visas are not granted automatically. You know that and I know that. So who could have superseded it?
No, on a matter like this, which involves our relationship with a major country like China, and with all the difficulties and complexities of our relationship, if such a decision had to be overruled, the direction had to come from the Prime Minister's office. Because it's not as if the Ministry of External Affairs and Home Affairs could initially have taken decisions of such a nature without keeping the Prime Minister's office in the loop. Because any sensible bureaucrat or even the minister would realize that unless the Prime Minister's office is kept in the loop, there could be some unpredictable response from the other side if the things became hot. So I think prudence requires in such cases to keep everybody in the loop, especially the Prime Minister's office.
So let's assume that everybody was in the loop, Professor Acharya. But since India's neither actively nor passively ever supported Chinese dissidents of any kind, leave alone Uyghurs or pro-democracy activists, what sense did it make to give visas to such people and allow them a space in India?
Frankly, it is. I think the whole thing smacks of a very hastily, knee-jerk kind of a thought out
But Mohan says
reaction.
it is not knee-jerk. These
no,
conferences were in the planning process for a long period
no,
of
the
time. So
conferences
people would have
may
had
well-
months of time.
The conferences may well have been in the planning stage, and these are, as he said, annual. But to invite specific individuals could have been a somewhat more, let's say, recent kind of a decision. The point really here is that if we are talking of a country responding to a certain challenge that they are facing from a powerful country like China, then you have to think this through.
Yeah.
Now, my concern over here is twofold. Number one, that if we are going to start this business of tit for tat, then I think we need to have a far more stronger, not stomach really, but sinews for that. And secondly, that where exactly, this whole question of the locus, where exactly was the decision taken? Who then decided to overturn it? And how do we end up?
Yeah.
So the whole thing is really quite incomprehensible in my mind.
Fair enough, fair enough. Let's try and make it comprehensible. So, Mohan, so Pakistan has always been a willing pawn in the hand of China to contain India. But is it wise for India, or was it wise for India to try and play the Xinjiang card? Alka just asked, does India have the capacity to support Uyghur separatism? And would it get international support if it did so? Because that conference, after all, you said, was funded by Americans and by...
See, it's not just about Uyghur. I think it's a question of separatism per se. Would you want to have a discourse on separatism at a time when you are faced with... And listen, one very important thing is that the World Uyghur Congress on its website has a map which shows the entire J&K as part of Pakistan.
Okay, Mohan.
I think, we have typically, a mixed position on this. We already have the Tibetans here, there's the government of exile here. It's a separatist movement, like it or no. They want independence from China. But there's a historical reason for that, and they've been here since 1959. But otherwise, we have not encouraged any separatist movements anywhere. Even on Balochistan, official position is we don't support it. Okay, so I think this was therefore an interfaith, inter-ethnic conference. It's not a conference of separatists. This is from China. So that, they were exploring the diversities of China, the roles of nationalities in China. That is all in the agenda, which I saw is quite interesting. It doesn't talk about political aspirations. It talks about other things. But it's a fig leaf. So they're having
because
this
those aspirations cannot be met within existing China. So therefore, the demand for either greater autonomy by Tibetans or
the next step you make. But there was going to be no official communique saying that we all need to be separate and independent.
Fair enough. My question was that should India be playing Uyghur card directly or indirectly?
I don't think we're ready for it right now.
Okay.
It's our position. We are still very vulnerable to various other pressures.
Yeah.
I think But if you are thinking about it, then you should at least be willing to bark, let alone bite. We're not even willing to bark openly.
Okay. Ambassador Sibal, even if India was willing to play the so-called Uyghur card, why should the Uyghurs trust India, considering that India has not been very proactive even on the Tibetan cause, and the Tibetans, including the Dalai Lama, are told not to indulge in any political activity which can be perceived as anti-China. So they have the example of you're not allowing the Tibetans to do anything. Why would they trust you even if you wanted to play that card?
A couple of things. I think we've been looking for developing some options vis-a-vis China, because China continues to take all sorts of steps against our security interests and damage us a great deal in terms of our strategic security issues. But we've not been able to find an adequate card, and we've been very timid in playing the Dalai Lama card or the Tibetan card. But I think now, with China becoming much more assertive all over, including around us in its relations with Pakistan, CPEC, Gwadar, Indian Ocean, Colombo, all the mix of what they were trying to do. This was perhaps thought of as one way of opening up some options and having a so-called interfaith conference in a democratic framework. and allowing these people to come in as a signal to China that India can also play a card against the Pakistan card that they continue to play against us, and the pressure they put us territorially based on their occupation of Tibet. This could have been a strategy, but obviously this strategy has not succeeded, and we have backtracked.
Okay, badly executed. We need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again in a bit. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing India's flip-flop on giving visas and then revoking the visas to Chinese dissidents. Mohan, what impact does this flip-flop on visas, what impact has it had on the image of the Indian foreign policy establishment? Does the foreign policy establishment at the end of it come across as a wise establishment which made a mistake and then corrected it, or as a weak establishment which took a certain decision and didn't have the courage to go through with it?
Unfortunately, it's the foreign policy establishment which is going to carry the can for this. But the foreign policy establishment didn't have any inputs in this. The situation in India today is that critical areas of foreign policy are run by intelligence people. And they have no sense of institutional memory as far as, relations with countries are concerned, how we conduct ourselves outside, the nuances of international diplomacy. So this is a kind of a little tit-for-tat, cat-and-mouse game they keep playing, and they think that's diplomacy. And that, unfortunately, boomerang. We had egg on our face. The foreign policy establishment is going to carry the can for it, because that's what people see. But as far as my understanding is concerned, the MEA was really out of the loop on this, and it's been out of the loop on many things for a long time.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Alka, after Atal Bihari Vajpayee's visit to China as foreign minister in 1979, China had assured India that support and assistance for insurgents in India's northeast was a thing of the past, that we don't have to worry about it. And they've kept their word on it, by and large. Okay, the official establishment has not backed any of those insurgent groups. Now, if India encourages Uyghurs, as it tried to do this time, or starts these kind of pinpricks, might not China re-examine its decision about India's northeast?
Of course. When you start this game of tit for tat, then you have to be prepared for an increasing and escalating level of pinpricks that will happen. And I think we need to understand that this business of cards can be very, very seriously problematic. If you are look at all the three levels, you have a certain principled framework of Indian foreign policy, where you always, and especially in the context of terrorism, you maintain that we should not have this distinction between good and bad. Now you're trying to play that okay, your terrorist is not our terrorist. The second is at the level of the ethnic complexities. It's from South Asia at one end all the way to Central Asia. You have this maze of ethnic complexities. You start playing with the Uyghur particularly, we're going to have a mess in Central Asia, because Uyghurs are spread across there. And I don't think that some of the Central Asian countries at least would be very happy with what we will do with it. Okay. And finally, yes, the ability of the Chinese to inflict the damage on you today, unfortunately, is far more. Yeah. And therefore, anything that we do needs to be thought out in terms of all the way through to the end.
One quick point, not only that Uyghur group, rebellion in Xinjiang, is a jihadi movement. What signal are you sending here?
Yeah. So, Ambassador Sibal, can China not play this game better, as Alka is suggesting? Could they not foment trouble for us in the entire Maoist belt, in Kashmir, in Nepal, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, and even in Maldives?
Well, partly they're doing it already. Okay. And, by making all these territorial claims and very aggressive territorial claims, and protesting even when our Prime Minister goes for a small development project in Arunachal Pradesh, and calling this area South
We've
Tibet.
also protested the China-Pakistan economic corridor.
Because so that is our territory.
But that's happening at the diplomatic level. It's not happening at the level of funding terrorists or supporting terrorists.
Supporting insurgencies is not necessary for China at this point in time. They have put us under enormous pressure as it is by continuing to make these claims and then using Pakistan and now totally disregarding the fact that Kashmir from their own, from Pakistani viewpoint, is a disputed territory, and then taking strategic decisions which imply that from their point of view, this part of Pakistani occupied Kashmir is Pakistani Kashmir, contrary to their own position they took in 1963 with PLA fellows working there, involved in development projects. And let me say one thing. The explanation they have given for their technical hold is arrogant and patronizing, basically saying that we don't recognize that the terrorism issue is an international issue between India and Pakistan. It's a bilateral issue, and you resolve it and have serious consultations amongst yourself. This is what we should tell the Chinese, that your problem with Uyghur or anybody else is your problem. Why do you involve the international community? Don't suppress dissent the way you do. Treat these Uyghurs and Tibetans with humanity and respond to their aspirations, and the rest of the world is not concerned.
So therefore, the long and short of what you're saying is that India should develop alternatives to challenge China in the way it is challenging India in the region.
In a prudent way, yes.
Okay. Alka, given the wide asymmetries between China and India in terms of GDP, in terms of military spending, in terms of weaponry, what have you, is it prudent to develop these alternatives which will lead to confrontation, or should we seek peace and tranquility with China?
See, one parallel that can be drawn here is, I mean, if you are saying that Pakistan adopts a strategy of using terrorism to destabilize its neighbor, which means that it is asymmetric response to a neighbor which is much more powerful than you. So what therefore is being suggested is that because China is more powerful than us, then we have to develop our asymmetric responses, which means that let's start developing these small cards. But the problem with these cards, as I've mentioned again, is that they have a tendency to rebound. And particularly when you do not have the depth in terms of assets, economic, strategic, political, then you don't enter into games which you know that you are bound to lose.
But one point I want to make here. China is constantly confronting us, and we are backing off. Now, the moment we want to do something, then our psychology should not be that we are confronting China. It is just that we are at last developing some kind of a response to the constant, more than pinpricks, with deep security challenges that China is confronting us with.
I agree with Kanwal. We have to have a set of responses to deal with the Chinese, and part of this could have been that. But by this way, you are only conveying disarray, and the Chinese believe that you're in disarray.
No, I do say that responses have to be developed, but what kind?
Okay, so let me ask you, what kind of one response could be that we become a great economic partner of China, because we do see China as a source of investment. China sees India as an investment destination. So should we turn our back on China as an investor, as an economic partner, and actually begin confronting it?
They're not an economic partner with $40 to $45 billion of trade imbalance out of a total of about $70 billion for the last 5-6 years. What is this kind of partnership? And they erect all sorts of non-tariff barriers for our products there with pharmaceuticals, IT. They don't open up their internal market, not only to us, but other countries have similar problems. It's not a partnership. It's a one-sided arrangement, which China has with many other countries too. And we don't want to have this kind of a pattern as they have with Africa. So let's not exaggerate it. But yes, if there are areas in which they can come in, help build infrastructure here and there, taking into cognizance our security concerns, by all means, we should not oppose that. But let's not believe that the Chinese have developed a model of partnership which can really benefit us.
Okay. Want to say something quickly?
I think we have to explore this relationship further, because by focusing on a very unbalanced trade and to say that therefore the relationship does not have scope, I think we have not even begun to look at the
really
possibilities.
Running out of time. Mohan,
I think we really have to look at Chinese sovereign investments in India. Trade imbalances will be with different countries also. But China has got these reserves which are sitting in American banks, not earning any money, and you should encourage them to invest in India, infrastructure and ports, railways, long-term projects, get them invested in India, few $100 billion of investment, will keep good relations going there.
And then they will support you in international forum, because they would not want to
but
destabilize
you always have a nuanced
but have they done this
relationship.
with Japan? Japan is their second biggest investment trade partner, but look at the kind of pressure they're putting on Japan. The Chinese separate economics
But
from
the difference,
security.
if Chinese invested here, then the attitude will be different.
All right. We've really run out of time. I'd like to thank all of you, Mohan, Guruswamy, Alka, Acharya, Ambassador Kanwal, Sibal, for participating in this discussion. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week as usual. Until then, goodbye, and thanks for watching India's World.